motion?
I'll move the minutes.
Second.
Motion's been moved and seconded. A roll call, please.
Agency members Manukian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Quintero, Weaver, Chairman Yousefi.
What's next, please?
Next is oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Members of the redevelopment agency may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The matter may be referred to staff through the executive director for investigation and report.
Do you have any oral communication cards? Okay. City clerk's telling me we have no oral communication card. Is that accurate? I see that's correct. So oral communication is closed. What's next, please?
Next item is on the business agenda, 6A, public hearing, Director of Development Services regarding parking exception for the property located at 337 North Brand, the Badass Coffee Company, for 13 spaces. At 6A1 is motion approving the parking exception, subject to findings and conditions pursuant to various chapters of the Glendale Municipal Code 1995.
Okay, and with that, I'll go to Mr. Starbird.
Yes, Mr. Chair, understand you can hold Mr. Ahern responsible for the name of this business.
I was going to say, that's
But
okay.
he is our coffee aficionado on staff, so I'll have him do the staff report.
That word is now okay to use in the
Well,
community, huh?
not in my family, but
I think it's the name of an animal.
I think it is too.
Yes, so let's
correct.
remember that.
Mr. Chairman, members of the agency, the item before you today is a request for a parking exception for a coffee shop moving into a retail storefront on the 300 block. I'm sorry?
He wants the name of the coffee.
The Nasty Burrow Coffee Company.
Yes, keep going.
Moving into a retail storefront on the 300 block of Brand Boulevard. The storefront was previously occupied by T-Mobile phone store. It's adjacent to Jack's Restaurant on North Brand Boulevard. The parking code for a coffee shop like this requires it to be parked as fast food, so they would, by code, require 19 spaces. The buildings in that area, as you know, have no parking at all, other than the parking that's provided in the public lots. So this location, by staff's calculation, would require 19 spots. They would get a credit in terms of what the existing use was of 6 parking spaces with a net shortfall of 13 spaces. Staff is recommending that you approve the parking exception for 13 spaces. The owners of the coffee shop own the franchise rights for Pasadena and Glendale. They're here today, James Allen and Michael Cohen. We've also taken this before the Downtown Merchants Association and explained the project to them without objection from the merchants. Staff is recommending approval. We're here to answer any questions that you may have, as are the owners.
Okay, Mr. Najarian.
Mr. Ahern, when we deal with issues like this and bringing in new businesses to Brand, and we consider parking exceptions, do we work with the owners, and do we perhaps address the issue of employee parking, and do we encourage them, do we locate and direct them to where we'd like them to park? I don't know where the nearest preferred spot for this location, maybe Orange Street Garage, but do we work with them on that? Because it seems to be that it's a cumulative effect of this is obviously before we implement our mobility plan and recommendations, but cumulative effect of all the employees along Brand that are parking most often, I think, on the 2-hour parking, the diagonal parking. And are we trying to indoctrinate the new businesses as to what good business practices with regard to city parking issues?
Agency member Najarian, the issue of employee parking, as you know, is one of the key issues on Brand Boulevard. We considered that and spoke with the owners about it and spoke with the downtown merchants. We considered imposing a condition requiring them to buy parking for their employees, and they normally staff that coffee shop with 3 employees. However, given what's coming forward in the mobility plan, staff felt that would be dealt with with the parking meters on Brand Boulevard, and then the incentives. The owner is willing to purchase 3 spaces in the Orange Street garage. That would be the closest long-term location. Of course, Lot 6 is directly behind them. They could park there at those metered spaces, but we'd prefer to see them in the Orange Street garage and rely on those incentives that the mobility plan brings. They recognize that their coffee shop lives from the employees in the office space in the downtown, and then individuals driving by that are able to find convenience parking. It's a convenience retailer. So it's to their advantage to have their employees there. They're willing to buy parking if we so direct it. At this point, staff thought that might be dealt with best through the incentives and the metering of Brand Boulevard.
I'd feel comfortable, and I know the implementation of the mobility plan parking suggestions are at the forefront of the council, but I would personally feel better if we were to ask them to obtain some employee parking in the Orange Street garage until such time as we sort through all the implementation of our meters and our pay stations and all this other stuff.
We could modify the approval and make it a condition of approval and ask the owner to come up and confirm that he would accept that condition in the approval.
I would be in favor of that. I don't know about the rest of the agents.
Any other
It's no problem.
comment?
We're the owner.
Wait, please, thank you. Any other comments? I tend to agree with my colleague in here. I think it's going to take at least 8 months, based on what we heard from the last mobility study, to deal with this issue. And I know after that, it would probably self-police itself and resolve that issue all by itself. But until then, I think I can take the red face test with the public. And as the gentleman, I'll call him. I think you're Michael Cohen?
Yes,
Okay, why don't you come up? I'll call
Chairman
you up.
Yosefian,
Yes.
you might want to open the public hearing.
I am opening the public hearing. Your name for the record, please.
My name is Michael Cohen.
Thank you.
This is my partner, James Allen.
James Allen.
Okay. And do you have an issue with getting 3 parking spaces for your
I think
employees
it
in the
only
Orange
makes
Street
sense,
garage?
especially with our business. We want as much open on the street as possible because it's a quick in and out. So it also would make sense. I want our employees to come and know where they're going to park and come to work and not worry about finding spots. So that's going to be part of the compensation.
And there'll be more parking available for your customers. That's generally what everybody
You're talking about the one next to Billy's on Orange, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Great.
That's generally the one that nobody knows it's there, but I'm glad that you know it.
I'm from Glendale, and when Mr. Weaver was talking about the name and went over it, it's in relationship to the animal. We have pictures of ours, so you can feel better about the way that it's
Here's the
going to
logo.
the way it's going to look. And it's an American product with the burro in the middle carrying the coffee, so it's 100% American. So the name is throws you a little bit, but
I mean, Mr. Seven, is this part of a national chain? Did I read that?
yes, it is. 61 stores.
Pretty successful?
Yeah, they've been
Starting
successful
out.
everywhere except California. So we want to hit a home run, and that's why we chose Glendale.
Is it
We're up in the
is
top
it,
50 in
is it like a
Entrepreneur
Starbucks?
magazine now.
No. It's the opposite of Starbucks.
what is it?
It's 100% American Kona coffee only.
Oh, the Hawaiian coffee.
Kona
Hawaiian coffee.
Good coffee.
It's good coffee, yeah.
You notice we're getting through this whole presentation without mentioning the name of the company.
That's okay. Let's say it's Juan Valdez without his animal, right?
Well, that's a good
His
way to
animal
put it.
has decided to separate himself.
It's
from
the bad
Juan
burro.
Valdez. Yeah.
Burro is what carried the coffee across the hills. That's why they've been incorporated into the sign.
Right.
It's the bad burro.
Do you have any other comments you would like to make at this time?
We just love to be a part of Glendale, and we thought we were very happy when we heard the space opened up. We were hoping to hit a triple our first time out, but we believe we got a home run
I
instead.
did have one other question. What is your turnovers? People in and out in 10, 15 minutes kind of a thing?
We anticipate our turnover to be pretty much in the morning, serving most of those offices up there and relying heavily on the foot traffic. And then after the foot traffic, our lunch menu would incorporate some of the Hawaiian theme, in and out 10, 15 minutes. And then after 5 o'clock, probably a destination for students, internet support, coffee, smoothie, drinks, and so forth and so on. Kind of taking the place of Porto's after 6 o'clock. We'd be open probably till 10.
And we're right
Okay.
underneath the hotel, so we
No
do-
hula dancers?
No hula dancers at the beginning.
Well, it goes well with Damon's theme.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife.
Other questions?
My wife's from Hawaii, so I know the Kona coffee quite well.
Yeah, that's
The
what we're
product
hoping.
is also good, too, which is what's really nice about it, is that we do have a distinction. I believe that our coffee is superior than Starbucks, and hopefully we'll be able to prove it.
We'll investigate that.
I'm sure you guys will be over there investigating
Is
that.
the interior going to look like these?
Yes. It's all done through a corporation in Oregon that does them just strictly the coffee places with the Hawaiian theme, the fish tanks, the surfboards, the sand, the...
Same general theme through all of
Yes,
them.
exactly.
Yeah, ought to do very, very well.
It should be fun. It should really lighten up that corner, too. Hopefully when the people go to the bank, then they'll come next door and spend their money.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Harry Hall?
Let me get these back. I want to get them back.
Your name for the record, please.
Harry Hall, President of Downtown Merchants Association. Chairman Yosefian, members of the Redevelopment Agency. I'm sorry to offend my good friend David Hearn over here, who drinks a lot of Starbucks, but this is actually good coffee that they have. I like Starbucks, but I know Dave drinks like 12 cups a day. The merchants, as Dave said, Mr. Cohen did come to the meeting last month and explained his operation to us. We are more than welcome to have them in the neighborhood with open arms. We think they'll be a great addition. I think the parking problem, as we've already done, by the passage of the employees, during the day, from 7 to 5, it's going to be walk-in trade from across the street. A lot of people from the 300 and 400 buildings on the east side of the road. So, we think they're going to be just a wonderful addition to the neighborhood, even with their name. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry.
The bad borough.
There's no other cards, so I close the public hearing. Mr. Weaver.
I'd move 6A1 for the bad borough with the condition of the 3 parking.
With the condition.
Is there a second? There's a motion and a second. I just want to let you know, Kona coffee has the least amount of acid than any other coffee. Now, my wife drinks Starbucks, but I drink Kona because my stomach is not as strong as my wife's. So, thank you very much, so I don't have to go all the way to Hawaii to get the coffee. Roll call, please.
Agency members Manukian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chairman Yusefian.
Aye. What's next, please?
At 6B is Director of Development Services regarding review and discussion of a revised proposal from Amity Real Estate LLC for property located at 225 East Broadway, former DPSS site. At B1 is motion accepting revised proposal from Amity Real Estate LLC and directing staff to further refine the terms of the and conditions of the proposal. 6B2 is motion authorizing the Executive Director to execute an ENA with Amity Real Estate LLC in order to negotiate the terms of a disposition and development agreement DDA, subject to comments and conditions from the agency and review by the agency council.
Okay, and with that, I'll go to Mr. Starbird.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is a matter you requested to be placed on a public agenda to give the Amity Group an opportunity to present to you and for you to give direction on a revised, I'll call it a revised approach for the DPSS building on Broadway owned by the agency. Let me ask Alex Hamilton, who has prepared the staff report on this, to give you an overview of that. And Amity is prepared today to give you a PowerPoint that takes you through their proposal. Staff will be prepared to answer any questions you have on that and to receive direction from you. Alex?
Thank you. Agency members, I've got a brief PowerPoint presentation that I would like to run through to give you a background on
Your
this.
name for a record?
Alex Hamilton with Development Services.
Okay.
Brief.
Very brief. I can run through the slides very quickly.
You didn't number them, so we can't count.
If you recall, there was an RFP prepared, a request for proposal prepared in early 2006 for redevelopment, to explore redevelopment options on the DPSS site. It was released in early 2006, and that process was really designed to encourage flexible and creative development proposals. Originally, there were 10 developers who submitted proposals in response. At about that same time, this was about February of 2006, we had an appraisal done to really kind of internally establish a benchmark for the RFPs, in terms of where we're at by way of value. That appraisal determined that the total estimated value of the entire site was $5.5 million, breaking it up as follows. $4 million for the office building. Highest and best use was determined to be an office use and rehab of the existing building. And though not formally part of the appraisal, the estimate for the parking lot was given at about $1.5 million, or about $100 a square foot land value. After the initial review of the proposals, the agency looked at the evaluation process and weighed in on a couple of other items that they felt very strongly about, one of which was preference for adaptive reuse of the building, and then the other was a strong preference for fair compensation to the agency for land and improvements. In May of 2006, the agency selected an unsolicited $6.5 million offer from Amity Real Estate for the DPSS building and the parking lot to the north. The Amity offer was the highest at $6.5 million. The next highest, which was also an unsolicited offer, was $4 million for the building and the adjacent parking lot. The original Amity Real Estate proposal was to convert the existing building into about 45 units of condos with approximately 15,000 square feet of retail at the ground floor. They were to propose to add 1 to 2 stories onto the existing building. Conversely, on the expanded site, they were proposing to construct 60 units of market-rate condos and 4 levels of parking, 2 below ground and 2 above. Just to remind you, the immediate offer was selected as it was consistent with the greatest number of agency objectives, their guidelines at the time. It conformed to the additional agency direction for fair compensation and reuse. Also, it was represented actually above fair market value for both agency parcels. It is a private investment project requiring no agency assistance or participation, and finally created an economically viable destination. In June of 2006, the agency authorized an exclusive negotiating agreement with Amity Real Estate and ENA for an initial period of 75 days. The 75 days initially covered environmental review by the developer of the building as to its suitability for reuse, acquisition of the adjacent apartment building, and it gave the developer time to investigate historic design options. I might add that reuse of the building and preservation of key architectural elements has really somewhat constrained what can happen to the building. The ENA initial period ended on September 11th, 2006. At the time, the developer had made a lot of progress in its initial due diligence. Unfortunately, they were unable to acquire or come to terms with the adjacent apartment building property owner. They continued an exploration and refinement of design options for the DPSS building renovation and the changing nature of the housing market. As you're all aware, the housing market is somewhat softened, particularly as it relates to ownership product, and it didn't, in the opinion of the developer, didn't warrant the addition of units onto the DPSS building. In November of 2006, a revised project scope was presented to the agency, still included the $6.5 million offer, but the project scope had changed to now include adaptive reuse of the DPSS building for an office use, as well as development of a 40 to a 50 unit standalone residential project on the adjacent parking lot. Also, in November of 2006, there was very limited discussion as to the parking needs for the project. At the time, it was assumed that the parking demand was to be met on site as much as possible, and the ENA was extended by the agency to January 23rd of 2007. Shortly prior to expiration of the ENA, the developer proposed a modified project and terms to the project, and concluded that the on-site parking for the office use would be economically infeasible, and proposed using both the Marketplace and Exchange public parking garage to satisfy the code-required parking of 178 parking spaces. The key terms of the revised proposal from Amity Real Estate included the $6.5 million land purchase price, which is $1 million more than the appraised value at $5.5 million, and they offered to pay for parking in both the marketplace and exchange garages at the current monthly rates of $45 to $55 per month, plus what they've added is what they're considering or calling an in-lieu fee of $13.75 per space per month. Other terms of the proposal included the ability to lease 50 spaces in the exchange and 128 spaces in the marketplace. Amity Real Estate is indicating that the 50 spaces in the exchange are really necessary for executive staff and key staff persons in the office building. They agreed to pay future parking rate increases to the base rate. The in-lieu fee will be of $13.75 per space per month will be paid for as long as the spaces are used, which, as it's proposed by Amity Real Estate, is in perpetuity. We've looked at a 30-year term with some options to extend. I want to point out that consistently it's been pointed out to Amity's, and they understand that the parking in both garages is on a non-exclusive basis, and that the city or agency would allocate the spaces between the garages, but at minimum, the Amity's have indicated that they need 30 spaces in the exchange garage. Other terms include the payment for the spaces. The rent and in-lieu fee will commence when a certificate of occupancy is issued for the DPSS building upon completion of the tenant improvements, and that the city or agency is responsible to replace the parking in the event of destruction of the parking spaces, and this is a standard term for most public parking spaces. As it relates to parking capacity, Traffic and Transportation Department did conduct a survey in December of this last year that indicated there is capacity in the marketplace garage for all 178 spaces. It also looked at, or at least it looked at the exchange garage, and the staff in Traffic and Transportation has indicated that the 128-50 space split is doable in both garages. As it relates to the marketplace garage, the Traffic and Transportation staff looked at the existing demand in 2006 at its peak, and also projected future demand in the marketplace garage. As it relates to the value of the parking, just in summary, staff believes there's a couple of ways to look at the value of the parking. The first way really is just what is the value of the parking based on the annual revenue that it generates, and we've calculated that to be $3.9 million, or in today's dollars would be $1.8 million. We believe that how the parking is valued and how you look at the parking is going to be very useful in weighing out the pros and cons of the modified proposal presented by Amity. The other way of looking at it is really the long-term value of the parking, insofar as the Amity's are seeking really a long-term commitment of those spaces. What would it cost to build those spaces? And of course, that's in today's dollars, but depending on the type of structure, if it's above grade or at grade, it would be about $4.4 million to $6.2 million for subterranean parking to build.
I was just going to make a comment that maybe the best way to value it, how do you value empty parking structures? Because in your analysis, the reality is that the marketplace garage is, for the most part, an empty parking structure, so there's zero revenue there. Just wanted to make that comment.
And then we've also covered in the report that the actual cost to maintain a space, and Jono can speak to this as well if more information is needed, is at about $350 per space per year to maintain those spaces in the garage. So, and I don't know if there's some economy of scale if you have a full parking garage, if it costs less to maintain one than to maintain an empty one. But again, if you have questions about that, Jono can answer them. Just quickly, and this is really additional information that we incorporated into a slide. In response to some numbers that we put together in the staff report, we looked at what increment would be generated by the proposed project. And in the first column, which is the annual average, this is a table that's been prepared by Kaiser Marston, and it, assuming for both projects, both the office building as well as the residential project, and then factoring in the annual parking rental from the rental of spaces, we're looking at about $384,000 per year increment that's generated by both phases of the project. Also, I'd like to qualify that the value of the office building, that we use the appraised value, which we know to be $4 million. We know that once the amenities are done rehabbing the building, it's going to be at least double that, if not more. So these projections for increment estimates are very, very conservative. As staff, we believe it's better to err on the side of just, being super conservative in this instance than to overstate something. The second column, of course, is just what the total contribution is over 30 years, and then the present value, which is something that we've used quite often here in these discussions, is in today's dollars, this contribution is about $10.6 million.
Question.
Yes.
On the first line, the total that you have down there, which is $384,500, that has taken the 20% set aside out of it, or it's included?
It's included in it, and in fact,
it's included in there.
And in fact, that was, yes, it is. It was not in our staff report originally, so this table was prepared in response to an omission of the 20% set aside that the project would generate.
So this includes everything?
Yes.
The first one?
Yes.
In 1 year?
Yes.
The next one is a 30-year normal?
Yes.
And the one after that is
Nominal.
the 30 years
right.
Net present value.
That's
so
correct.
If we bring it back to net present value, that's what this is.
Right.
Okay. Mr. Minukin, you had a question?
No,
Please continue.
Okay. We believe there are several advantages of the Amity real estate offer. Of course, one of which is that their offer is, the agency would be compensated more than the fair market value for the property by $1 million plus. Another is that they're proposing retention of the DPS's building and its key architectural features. We do believe that the proposed office entertainment production use is compatible and complementary with other uses in the area. The creation of 200 new entertainment-related jobs, of course, increasing customer base for the downtown and East Broadway neighborhoods and businesses. Their Phase 2 proposal does add much-needed housing in the area. And again, going back to the table that preceded this slide, we estimate that at minimum about $384,000 per year would be in tax increment revenues would be generated to the agency for both projects. Again, staff views the generation of increment as really icing on the cake, so to speak, in addition to the offer that we have from the Amities and their offer to compensate us for parking or pay for parking and at least rent the spaces. Anything we get by way of increment is just added additional dollars.
One other question. What was that property generating before?
Zero. It's not on the rolls.
And for how long that has been like that?
Since about 1977 when the county took it over.
Okay. And what have we been paying for maintenance? Because I know we keep the building and we maintain it.
I'm guessing on average, including utilities, about $12,000 a year.
$12,000 a year. Okay. And we are using that parking place now. Is the concessionaire giving us anything?
Yeah, we do get some revenue from that. As to the north parking lot, I don't know the exact numbers. I know the smaller lot at the southeast corner of Broadway and Louise probably gets us about $1,100 a month in parking revenue.
Okay.
So I'm guessing double that for the north parking lot, maybe $2,000, $2,500 a month in revenue.
Maybe the one on top would offset the one on bottom. So what we generate on that parking lot will offset the maintenance that we need on
Conceivably, yes. But the cost, it's not cheap to maintain that building. We do have to keep a minimal level of power on in the building to keep it lit. So, those are costs. They're agency costs. And then finally, the generation of significant parking fund revenues to the tune of about $132,000 a year. There are some disadvantages to the offer, one of which, of course, is, as you know, it's the long-term commitment of parking resources, and if you apply strictly the cost to replace that parking in a parking structure, even in today's dollars, it lessens the advantage of the immediate offer. The other one is that the space is committed to the single user does reduce the overall supply to the city and agency for future growth and demand. And then lastly, and just explaining very briefly on this, just the precedent-setting nature of the request, it's staff's view that this request could be viewed by other developers, other potential developers out there as kind of the open door to come in and assume that public parking is a resource and that they won't have to build public parking, or they'll look to agency or city public parking to offset, some or all the parking requirements or parking they'll need to provide. We think with some guidelines that there's a way around this, but we do think that that is potentially an issue.
One question before you go any further. Space committed to the single user, is the space exclusively to this user, or it's a first-come, first-served basis?
First come, first serve, non-exclusive as is the case.
So there's not an area that's going to be... We're not going to put signs there saying this is for the PSS building?
No.
Okay,
no.
So first come, first served type
That's
of
correct.
thing.
Now, with the management of the garages, and I know Jono does have some plans as to how to more efficiently manage the garages
Right.
as the capacity, as the usage increases, but we can never commit spaces on an exclusive basis in the garage.
Okay.
The next steps, if you are willing to accept the revised offer as described in the staff report, we are recommending that a new exclusive negotiating agreement be prepared. The last one did expire on January 23rd of this year. It's not absolutely necessary, but we do think it's a good thing to have to memorialize the feedback that we get from you today, if you're willing to move forward on this. The next step, of course, and it's been kind of an ongoing process, is we'll work on draft terms for a disposition development agreement, including finalizing the financial feasibility. And we're expecting to present a draft outline of the business terms to you sometime in March of '07. I also want to point out, though, that CEQA review will be necessary as we move forward on this, and we really can't do anything by way of formal consideration from you until probably about May of this year. That's assuming that CEQA begins and continues to move along for both Phase 1 and Phase 2. Of course, we also have the 3343 report, so there's some statutory requirements that we have to satisfy before we can actually bring you the disposition development agreement.
Question, why do you need to have another ENA if the agency decides to move forward with this or modifies it in any way and goes forward? Don't you want to just go to a DDA?
We could certainly do that, and an ENA is not required.
Because we've been talking about this for the last, 3 months, 4 months? I mean, being a dead horse to an
If I
extent.
can, it just gives the developers some comfort.
Some certainty.
Yeah, it just gives them some certainty. I mean, from our standpoint, an ENA just restricts us from talking to anybody else. But it really just gives the developers some comfort that we're serious about this and as a way to frame at least these broad business points as you work on a DDA.
Well, if we move forward with DDA, wouldn't that give the developer comfort?
Well, yes, but you won't have that overnight. That takes a process to get developed, a public hearing. The ENA at least can spell out the basic terms as you have them here. But like I say, it's really comfort for the developer. From the city's standpoint, it limits us, but frankly, we wouldn't be talking to anybody else unless you direct us to do so anyway. So it's really comfort for the developer and kind of a first step toward this long-term relationship, which is kind of a precursor to a DDA that will take a public hearing and some process involved and a whole lot more paper.
Okay. I'll ask that question from developers, see if they care or they don't. Continue.
Well, if that concludes my presentation, if there are no further questions, I'd like to turn it over to Rodney Kahn. He does have a presentation on behalf of the developer, and I believe they do have a slide that they wanted to show you as it relates to the value of the financial value of the job creation, as well as some numbers that they have as it relates to estimates for the pro forma.
Before you go, any questions for staff? Mr.
I have a question regarding the revenue projections, Alex. On the net present value column to 30 years, the rate is discounted at 6%. Is that our rate of return on our investment portfolio, or is that what it costs us were we to borrow funds?
I believe, and Mr. Starbird could help me out on this maybe, I believe it's what it costs us to borrow funds.
What is our
5%.
return rate currently on our investment portfolio?
3.25, something.
It's less than this, but as our city treasurer would tell you, that could change because we're getting out of longer-term investments and into shorter-term investments because our yield curve has been inverse for the last year or so because of the change in interest rates. I look at this kind of both ways, whether it's our investment rate or it's what the interest rate would be on a bond issue. I look at them as generally being equal. What we could borrow for tax-exempt rates, generally, under normal circumstances, is somewhat equivalent to what we can invest in our limited investments, high security, that we do. So it's likely that a tax-exempt rate will be a little bit less than our investment rate, or maybe a little bit higher than our investment rate. At the current time, it's higher than our investment rate, but that could change depending on which point in time you take. So
it's 5% in the report.
Yeah, well, and that's what we were using as we were kind of ballparking this, is roughly 5%, which is probably a little higher than our current investment rate, but more of a long-term rate that we'd look at. Depending on what kind of tax-exempt bonds you issued, whether they were utility revenue or COPs, you get a little bit of a different rate. But generally, they'll tell you that we can invest generally at about 1.25 basis points higher than what we borrow at. So 6% is probably a very conservative figure, and it tends to make the net present value a lower number as opposed to a higher number.
What I'm looking at, just in my own mind and evaluating, is that net present value of $1.8 million versus what the estimated cost of building those spaces at $4.4 million to $6.2 million. So that 1.8, is that based on the 6%? Or the 5%?
In the case of this table, which was prepared by Kaiser Marston, it assumed the 6%.
So what would 5% be? Can you come back later? I mean, I don't want to put it...
We can figure it out.
5% would be a larger number, not appreciably larger, but a larger number.
Would it be in the...
Well, I've been
half range, or
I hate to venture into this field because Kaiser Marston sure knows these numbers better than I do. But as I plug in,
mathematician in the house.
As I plug in, I don't think Kaiser Marston's here, but as I
maybe the applicant can address that not necessarily now, but double check your numbers.
Let me just say, I'm coming up with higher net present value figures than is reflected in this table. So I'm a little, even if I use the 6%, I'm a little uncertain as to what Kaiser Marston has factored in here. Okay. At 5%, the number would be even larger. The number I was quickly computing, just using my little HP here, is a net present value on the AV portion, just the increased and assessed valuation, net present value of about $3.7 million. If you take the net present value on the parking, which I computed even at 6% at $1.7 million, on just the parking revenues, $1.7 million plus $420, or roughly $2.1 million as opposed to the $1.8 million that's being shown here. So I'm a little uncertain as to how these numbers were generated. They're different than what I'd calculated on using my little HP here.
And it assumes the parking rate consistent at the $40 to
$45 to $55.
And again, I plugged in 55. I'm not sure whether they used a blended rate or what they used
a blended
here.
rate.
A blended rate. So they're getting somewhere, that's probably the difference. They're getting somewhere between the 45 and the 55, so probably at 50. I used 55. It comes up a few $100,000 more.
Mr. Quintero.
I just want to point out once again, but when we talk about a net present value on the parking, there is no net present value because the parking spaces are empty. So it's hard to kind of make the leap when the parking spaces are empty, and there's really no projection in the immediate future, and by that I mean the next 2 years or whatever, that there will be used. I don't see any project that's going to fill up the parking structures.
Mr. Najari.
No, that number, Frank, is assuming they're paying the $50 for each space for 178 spaces.
How much is it worth today?
Projected over 30 years and drawn back to today. What is it? In other words, if they were to write us a check and say, here you go, this is what it's worth, this is what we're buying those spaces for, not necessarily what the city's value is. So, I mean, in essence, they're paying $2 million towards construction of a parking garage or...
Well, they're paying their rental. Mr.
Yeah, if I can, Mr. Quintero, members of the agency, it's just a way to come up with a way to evaluate something today in terms of what is that income stream worth to us today. Frankly, it's not trying to diminish the value of what they're proposing. It's a way for us to interpret this and evaluate it as if they were going to give us cash for the use of these spaces. The other piece that the table reflects that I think is important and has been brought out is this property has been off the rolls. So for all intents and purposes is valued at zero from a tax perspective. And it's continued to be while the agency owes it because we're also not taxable. Back on the rolls, there's an appreciable value for getting that back in the rolls. And again, we've tried to bring that future income stream down to a net present value, which as developed property and with some additional increment for the value of the construction is going to be somewhere on the other side of what we're estimating here, because likelihood is there will be $3 to $4 million in construction value. The other point I should make is not listed in our advantages, but I think Amity will certainly touch on this, is the preservation of the building and some of the historical architecture within the lobby. I don't know how you assign a value to that, but it certainly has a negative value to the developer because it would probably be less expensive for them if they didn't try to retain that. So they're carrying a greater burden than was reflected in the appraisal we had on the property, because that appraisal presumed the property wasn't historical, had no architectural significance, so wouldn't be a greater burden to somebody who might buy it. Had that been reflected, there might have been a lesser value in the appraised value report. And I think Amity will probably take you through what they propose to do in terms of preservation.
And one thing that I wanted to ask is, as far as the parking is concerned, that is a net present value of a 30-year, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so, and that's one thing that we need to keep in mind while you can calculate what it would cost to build a parking space. When you build a parking space, you own it forever. This is not forever. This is only for 30 years. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure. So for 30 years, this is what you're paying. If you want forever, you spend $6 million and you own it forever, so whatever that means, whatever that may be. And is there any other comments? Okay, let me go to Rodney Kahn.
When you're ready to go.
And some technology issues need to be resolved.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman, agency members, and city staff. My name is Rodney Kahn. My offices are here in the city of Glendale, and I'm here today on behalf of the Amity Real Estate Group. I wanted to answer two questions that were brought up at the beginning of my presentation. Mr. Yusefian, you pointed out, would we be more comfortable with an E&A? The question that was asked to us, and the answer is yes. We would like to see staff execute a new E&A for the project.
Okay.
The second thing, as it relates to some of the economics, I think Mr. Najarian asked a question. We have Greg Astorian, who's part of our project team, and during his course of the presentation, he's really going to focus on the economics of the overall project and the benefits to the city as it relates to that. Our original proposal back in May of 2006 included the existing Department of Social Services building converting primarily into residential dwelling units. We were looking at adding 1 or 2 stories on top of it. We were also looking at removing a significant number of architectural elements, both on the exterior of the building and the interior of the building. And as you can see posted behind me, could I borrow that handheld mic? Sure. Thank you. This is the original photograph, the opening day. The building was constructed in 1956, and this gives you an idea in terms of what was built at that time.
Is that Mr. Weaver's car back there?
I'm not sure.
It's like a 53 Chevy.
No, that's too old.
Didn't you say you had a Chevy?
56 Chevy.
Oh, okay.
What we did is, over the course of the past several months, we were encouraged to meet with the historic community, both the Glendale Historical Society and the Los Angeles Conservancy. And there came to an understanding over a series of meetings. And what came out as the key components was not to add any additional stories to the building, which is what you see, not to remove the fin, or where you see the Fidelity Savings sign area was, the retention of the brickwork on the exterior of the building, the retention of the green cladding on the side of the building, and to maintain the lobby and the mezzanine in its original configuration. Now, there's some other smaller components of it, but that was the main theme behind what we came to an understanding with the different groups and organizations. This understanding significantly changed how the building could be developed, and it also changed the economics of the project. Where before, for instance, on the second floor, we were extending the second floor out over the mezzanine. We had to reduce a substantial amount of square footage just to maintain the lobby mezzanine area. So as that translates into economics, we have some numbers for that as well. Staff mentioned the softening of the residential housing market, our inability to reach an agreement with the apartment building, which is sandwiched between the two properties. And we also looked at the limitation that the height of the building posed on us. So we took that into consideration, and we thought, what is the highest and best use for this building to have? Well, one of the principal developers of this project is Rahim Amidi, and he owns Hollywood Production Company, one of which is located here in the city of Glendale. They are very successful. It made the most common sense for us to use this building as an office use with entertainment users and to bring Hollywood Productions to the building. Where we are today, we have a break-even scenario for the Department of Social Services building. We have a limited amount of profit generated by the residential project, and it's not economically feasible to move forward with this project without purchasing our office parking, which is 178 spaces, in the marketplace and exchange parking structures. The residential component of the project will have parking on its site. As staff mentioned, we have not changed the purchase price, even though we have these restrictions and conditions. It's still at the $6.5 million, which is at least $1 million more than the land appraised for. We are also proposing to pay for the monthly parking at the published market rate, plus it equates to about a 30% premium over and above that. We are proposing to use off-site parking facilities to meet code requirements. Your traffic engineering consultants, there in their mobility plan, stated specifically that this was a major goal. The most efficient use of the existing parking facilities, to encourage new development, to find acceptable alternatives to constructing new parking, and to lease public parking spaces at market rates. It was mentioned there will be a full analysis as it relates to CEQA for the entitlements for the project, both for the Phase 1 and Phase 2. I have about 30 more seconds, then I'll wrap it up. For both Stage 1 and Stage 2, we'll also have public hearings for design review for the sign program and the parking arrangements. So our project will be fully and thoroughly analyzed and reviewed. I'll conclude my remarks, and in conclusion, we have a proven successful tenant that wants to occupy this building. We have a project that is aligned with redevelopment goals, the mobility plan, and the downtown specific plan, which encourages high-quality businesses to activate Broadway between Brand Boulevard and the Civic Center, which is exactly what we're doing.
I have a question.
Sure.
You said you have to go to design review for signage?
No, one of the components of the entitlements will be for a sign program.
Sign program?
Correct.
For the house, for the building?
For the building.
Okay.
But we will be going through the environmental process, CEQA process.
Right.
We'll also have the design review process, which ultimately is the agency reviewing, et cetera. And if you look
I thought that you were going to keep the sign, so use it.
We're going to keep the fin where it is located, but
Right.
the lettering and the signage on the exterior will be different.
Okay. Okay, I understand. Mr. Weaver?
Won't you be going also to design review for the apartment building?
Mr. Weaver, what we'll do is what the agency process is. We're looking at combining Stage 1 and Stage 2, which means that we're going to go to the agency architect, will comment on Stage 1, Stage 2. We'll go to the Planning Division Design Review for their recommendation, and ultimately come to the agency for your approval.
It wasn't just this building.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you
very much.
Barry Allen. Your name for the record, please.
I'm Barry Allen. Thank you, Mr. Yusefian. Authority members, agency members, rather, and staff. I'm Barry Allen. I think this is an excellent project. After looking at the materials that the staff has provided, seeing that your mobility consultant indicated that there's ample parking space in all of the city garages, and the fact that this particular development does speak to a building that has been sitting vacant, is becoming an eyesore in the city, and its outreach will affect the million square feet of empty available office space that we have in Glendale as it is moving into the area of the Hollywood productions, bringing in the type of tenants that will impact the city as the city provides more space for the entertainment industry, which is, other than healthcare, the most growth industry that we're looking at. And I think there's all sorts of wins for the city. I think it's an excellent project for the city, and I think it's certainly going to do more for the downtown area than the Career College. But the Career College, the students brown bagging certainly will be using the chess park and other facilities, but I don't think they're going to be bringing in the cash that and using the space that the city certainly can help out all of the realtors, building owners, and leasing companies. I'm Barry Allen for Vanguard, hoping that you will move forward with this particular project. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura Friedman.
Good afternoon. I'm Laura Friedman, Glendale resident. I'm here today on behalf of the Los Angeles Conservancy's Modern Committee in support of the Amity Real Estate Group's development proposal. The Conservancy believes that this project would help ensure the preservation and adaptive reuse of the former Fidelity Federal Building, which the Conservancy views as one of the best remaining examples of mid-20th century commercial architecture in the city of Glendale. Architectural aesthetics are somewhat subjective. This building might not appeal to everyone, I realize that, but I happen to find it one of the most elegant commercial buildings in Glendale. And I think that others will have the same appreciation of the structure once it's been rehabbed and being reused. The Los Angeles Conservancy believes the building to be as significant as the Glendale Federal Complex on Brand Boulevard, which was designed by the same architect, W.A. Sarmiento. The DPSS building is a cultural resource worth protecting, one that adds to the historic civic streetscape of Broadway between Brand and Central Boulevards. This small street arguably contains one of the more interesting and best examples of civic and commercial architecture all in one place within the entire county of Los Angeles. As a resident of Glendale, I fully support the proposed use of the building as a second Hollywood production center, which would bring an influx of creative businesses to downtown Glendale. In terms of something that Mr. Hamilton had suggested about setting maybe a negative precedent for developers coming in to expect parking grants from the city, I think it's pretty clear that adaptively reusing a historic building is very different from creating a new building. And I think that that would be obvious to any developer. We at the Conservancy believe that this building could be potentially eligible for listing as a historic resource at both the city and the state level. We're very encouraged that the city has favored projects that would adaptively reuse the structure. I would like to thank Alex Hamilton and his staff for being so supportive of the building throughout this process. I'm very proud to live in a city that treasures and protects its historic resources and that encourages this kind of public input and dialogue. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
I have a question of Laura.
Yes.
You aren't, on behalf of the Conservancy, the vertical louvers that were added later aren't necessarily
Because they were added later, I don't believe that they were considered to be an integral component of the building. I actually like them, and I like that they refer back to the building on brand. But I don't think that it would be, as you would put it, sort of a deal breaker for the Conservancy or for listing, since it wasn't built with them and they were added later. I think that Jay Platt from the Conservancy had looked at it and thought and decided that because they were not original to the building, that removing them wouldn't interfere if the building was going to be listed at some point.
And also, I noticed on that grand opening picture, the vertical features appear to be stainless steel.
That one.
You know, I don't know what's below the louvers right now, and whether those are still there or if they've been removed. I'm sure the owners
still there.
would know
It's probably a reflection
better.
of light.
No, it's there, and it is aluminum, actually.
If they are aluminum, I think they look pretty cool. It would be great if if they were still there or could be put back.
Would you encourage their retention if they're still...
I would personally. I think that they're a nice feature. I think they add a lot of visual interest to the building.
Those are vertical whites, the white thing?
Yeah.
along
They're
here.
shiny,
It gives them
actually.
vertical,
There's a little bit of shine to them.
breaks up
that's why.
They
the...
have deteriorated, so
Horizontal
you may
masses.
want to
They
replace them
relate
with
to that as
stainless
well.
steel to make it work.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted your...
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Arlene,
Ma'am? Ms. Friedman?
Ms. Friedman?
I wanted to get your take, since you obviously are quite proficient in this field. When you start at the corner of Brand and Broadway, starting with that building that was a bank building in the past that's been restored, then you've got this building, you've got the courthouse, which is registered, you've got the church,
Right.
the mid-century church, and all the way into the current...
All right, the police station, the municipal services building, and this building. It's an incredible civic corridor right in the heart of the city.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Eileen Vidor? Name for the record, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Arlene Vidor. I'm president of the Glendale Historical Society, and I would like to add our voice in support of the Amity project. We also believe, and I think you have some correspondence from the Historical Society, that this building is certainly a fine example of mid-20th century commercial architecture, and it really is akin to a great partner to the very iconic Glendale Federal Building on Brand Boulevard. We're awfully lucky to have two buildings by W.A. Sarmiento, and in fact, there is a project in Salt Lake City that was recently granted an award by the National Trust, given a very high national preservation honor. This was also a Sarmiento Bank building that was restored in Salt Lake City, and certainly this building would be on the same level as the two buildings we have. So I think that's a great example of a city that really appreciates its fine architecture, and I think that we all in Glendale should and do appreciate our fine architecture. The building is over 50 years old. I know sometimes it's painful to look at a building that we remember from our childhoods or that we have known for a long time and think of it as historic, because that kind of implies that we ourselves are historic. But that's actually a good thing, and I think it all really roots us to our city.
Historic yet.
He's not. I wasn't looking at anybody in particular. But anyway,
Soon, but not yet.
soon.
Everybody on this diet is a mid-century person.
Yeah, me too. But I also think, and the Historical Society believes that whatever disadvantages in the whole parking economic scenario have been discussed, that certainly this proposal, the amount of money and time that's put into it, and the good faith effort between the developer and the community and the preservation community, and working toward an agreement that certainly everybody agrees is attractive and will lend vitality and energy to the city. I'm sure Hollywood Productions are going to, and the people who come into that building are going to think it's the coolest thing ever, because that's the type of building that that attracts creative people, that the advantages will far outweigh any disadvantages, which seem to be much less than the advantages. So I sincerely hope that you will all consider supporting the agreement as proposed by the Amity Group, and we can all enjoy this beautiful building when it's in full swing. Thank you.
Arlene,
Thank you.
do you remember what year it was constructed?
I understand 56. It was the year of construction.
I was a junior in high school.
I was just
boy.
born.
I know you youngsters sitting up here.
Thank you. Harry Hall.
Thank you once again. Harry Hall, President of Downtown Merchants Association, Chairman Yosefian, members of the agency and staff. The Merchants Association is in support of the project. We think that the Amity Group does a wonderful job. They've brought a lot of business into the North Brand Boulevard area in the existing building that they renovated and recently took over in the last couple of years. We think that the type of employee that they bring into this building will surely help the exchange area as well as the marketplace during the midday and the dinner time periods. And as far as the parking exception go, I know in today's paper one of the local residents was concerned with the parking in the Exchange and the Maryland Street lot, and as we know that Jono's done a lot of work with Bonnie Nelson on the mobility study in the last recent months, that there is enough parking to do this. And as Ms. Friedman so eloquently put, I think the best way for us to put this over to people in future development to make Alex's life a little bit easier is that this is a historical project. I think that's a great reason to tell people, we're just not going to make these exceptions and do these things for everybody. But this is a historical building, and let's face it, if we don't get the Amity Group in here, who's a group we know does quality work along with Rodney Kahn, how long are we going to let the building remain empty, and what are we going to do with it? Thank you once again.
Thank you. Alan Levy.
Hi, my name's Alan Lieb. I am Chairman Emeritus of the Los Angeles Conservancy's Modern Committee, and I want to advocate that you approve this project, and I believe that they made a great effort to accommodate the preservation community in terms of negotiating aspects of the project that preserve, as you've seen, key elements of the building that relate to its historic integrity, and their offer was substantially more than any other offer you received for the RFP. They meet the original highest and best use condition of being office reuse for the property. Everyone seems to be in support of it in the community that's spoken so far. I believe that in terms of the louvers, you could consider the louvers to be have acquired significance, but like the restoration of the Chinese theater, they removed the 1950s marquee and replaced it with a reproduction of the 1920s marquee just to keep the original look of the theater as the sort of thing they were going for. You could say that the marquee that was from the early 50s or the late 40s was significant, but you have to kind of zone in on a functional era of significance that works for the project and the community of preservationists, and I think this does the job. So I advocate that you take it forward and do everything you can to approve the project as it's currently designed. Okay, thank you.
Greg Estoyan, last card.
Thank you.
Your name for the record, please.
Greg Astorian, 807 North Central, Remax. If I may, I just need to have some information passed out to you. Members of Redevelopment Agency, thank you. My name is Greg Astorian. Thank you for the opportunity. Let me begin, though, first by addressing a commentary by a Pakrot Markarian in today's news press, whereby concerns about DPSS parking matter were raised. First, though, a short historical perspective. The writer is the president of Pakrot Markarian, Inc., which in turn owns the apartment building right to the north of the DPSS building, located at 111 North Louis Street.
Interestingly, that apartment building is 16 units, and it has 0 parking spaces available for its tenants. Suffice to say, people who live in glass houses ought not throw rocks. But be as the case is, the concerns were not well-founded, as it has been explained by the capacities that exist in the garages. At best, these concerns are concerns that were raised, perhaps trying to jostle position for negotiating a deal with the immediate group. With that, I would like to quote President Harry Truman. He said once, "A pessimist is one who makes difficulties of his opportunities, and an optimist is one who makes opportunities of his difficulties." Amity Group's vision, its solution to the existing blight at the Social Security building, met with some challenges, albeit from the Historical Society and the adjacent apartment building owner. As opposed to abandoning the project, we decided to see the opportunities that may be hidden in these difficulties. Opportunities such as revitalization of the building. Opportunities such as leasing 66,000 square foot of vacant building to Hollywood Productions Company, thereby infusing the Broadway corridor with about 200 high-paying entertainment-related jobs. And as an added bonus, alleviating, lessening, making a significant dent in the high office vacancy rates that the city is experiencing. Germane to the Social Security building matter are the following salient facts, followed by some observations. 1. Amity Group offer still has always been $1 million over the appraised value, and about, even better, $2.5 million more than the best offer that this city ever had. 2. Social Security building has been sitting vacant, now what we find out, for about 10 years. What a great opportunity. Our calculations shows that once it's renovated, that is about $100,000 per year in addition to the property tax revenue that it will generate. 3. Many consider the building in its existing condition, not mind you when it will be done, once we're done with it, an eyesore, a nuisance. The revitalization plan is innovative in that it takes into consideration the input of the community. So it's a community-centered plan. 4. According to the city staff report dated January 16, 2007, which you have copies in front of you, the Marketplace Garage has a vacancy rate of about 50% throughout the year. This vacancy has existed since the garage opened in the early 1990s. 5. That vacancy translates into about 550 vacant spaces. Even when considering the addition of all the future uses, whether it's the Walgreens, the Steakhouse, the Quiznos, ASL, including the Amity Group use, the occupancy rate rises to only 75%. So there is about 25% additional space left at the marketplace. Now, near full or full occupancy of the garages would indicate that a redevelopment agency has been successful in achieving the primary objective of redevelopment plan, which is eliminating blight and deterioration and creating a culture of prosperity for the area merchants and the businesses. Imagine, if you would, a robust, vibrant, rekindled, if I may,
please wrap it up,
rejuvenated marketplace and Maryland Exchange. With that, if you wouldn't mind, I would like to go to, this will take really brief 60 seconds, on the calculations and what really this deal means for the city of Glendale. So what's in it for city of Glendale? Well, let's consider the sales price of $6,500,000. About
$6 billion as in boy, or
$6 million.
Yeah.
Just checking.
We haven't reached to that level yet.
You actually said a B, so but let's go to a B.
Maybe I meant a big $6 million, but
okay, that sounds
as it may. And I need to qualify this. Your staff report alludes to the fact that the net present value of this deal is about $10.5 million. Now, Our calculations is based on 5% discount rate as opposed to the 6% that is being used today, hence the difference, some of the differences. Also, we are taking into consideration the new assessed value of the building after pouring in close to about $7 million in order to renovate the building. So in the first phase, the first tax increment revenue that will be generated, discounted to today's value, and trust me when I'm telling you, these are correct numbers. And I'll be more than happy to explain it to you later on. I'm sure...
That's what Richard Nixon said.
The difference is I wasn't running for presidency, and nor would I consider to.
Okay, let's not stretch this thing too long.
Phase
Keep
1
going.
tax increment is $1,441,000. Your Phase 2 tax increment with the condominiums is $3,290,000. And your parking revenue, again at 5% discount rate, is $2,030,000. So in today's dollar terms, that means about $13 million to the city of Glendale for a property that is worth about $5.5 million. Now, one more important thing is that the payroll that will be generated, or the addition to payroll that will be generated by the Hollywood production, is approximately $28 million. With
Over
that,
30 years?
No. This is right now.
$28 million annually?
This is the payroll, exactly. This is the addition to the payroll. For the, if you were to consider the, I'll give you an example. Let's just take the Disney scenario.
No, I understand, but the payroll, you discounted everything else, 30 years, are you
No,
discounting
there's no discount for this one.
So the payroll is $28 million a year?
Correct. The jobs that are correct. The jobs that are created at Hollywood
200
Production,
jobs.
200 jobs, at an average of about $120,000 to $140,000 is the average job. That comes to about $28 million. That's like a cash machine at the footsteps of the
Annually,
marketplace. Yeah. With that, I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, and this closes the public hearing on this item. Whatever.
Public hearing.
Okay. What's the pleasure of my colleagues? Any discussion?
Those opposed, say aye.
Mr. Weaver.
Starbird, in spite of what we've heard as the disadvantages, are you recommending that this would be a good deal for Glendale?
Our recommendation is that this would be a reasonable proposal for this site. Let me run quickly through what we see as the advantages. Again, I know you've heard it before, but just to summarize, it is what we view as a good redevelopment purpose. The appraiser who appraised the site saw office, mixed use, and residential as the highest and best use. This proposal is consistent with that. The use of the parking structure gives us a little bit of concern because it uses up capacity in the Market Street garage, but transportation's evaluation of the Marketplace garage is that there is capacity, and all of this gets us to a point of what the traffic engineers have referred to as sort of the level of inconvenience. That doesn't mean the capacity isn't there beyond this, but if you committed additional spaces beyond this, then people who use the garage would begin to feel a sense of inconvenience in finding a space. But the capacity is there. And I do want to point out that although we guard these spaces very jealously in these garages, the garages were built for the purpose of spurring economic development in the downtown. You've used it very judiciously. You haven't made it available to anybody and everybody, but you have made it available for those high-priority projects. The valuation of the parking, the valuation of the improvements, and the upfront cost places this ahead of anything that you saw in the proposals that you accepted a little less than a year ago. So from the standpoint of where we are today, with this project, this proposal, and the economics, staff's view and recommendation to you is it is a very reasonable proposal that we would recommend you proceed with.
Okay. Well, from my standpoint, I came to the same conclusion over the weekend. I had to go back and, as you said at one time, forget anything that happened prior and look at this as if it came to us today, and the advantages to the city. Like I said, I'm the senior citizen. This is a young building, so I guess it better be preserved. I would hope that the new apartment complex has some of the architectural features of this, because my hope someday is that the apartment complex in between is removed and that a mirror image of the other apartment building is constructed. And it would be nice to think that this building and the other two kind of look like they came out of the same mold. I don't know if that's possible with the architecture today, but it would be a nice thing to have happen. I think it'll activate more of the downtown area by being there. Those workers will get out and walk down to the exchange, which will help, and into Brand. The last thing I remember is that we are building a lot of new apartments on Broadway, and hopefully some of these 200 workers will end up deciding to live in those apartments. At $140,000 a year, they can afford to buy those condos and be duck soup to live there and walk to work here. So I think that potential also exists. And I remember when Hollywood Productions came into the other location, I wondered, Hollywood Productions, who are they and what are they? And fat chance they're going to make it. I was told over in Hollywood they had run out of space and they needed more. Well, I got the surprise of my life when I found Hollywood Productions up on Lexington is also jam full. So I have no doubt that the entertainment industry will fill this building up too. So while there's disadvantages, and we'll have to sort that out in the future, I believe in the traffic analysis or the parking analysis that I got. It indicates the space is there. We'll just have to be prudent in how we deal with other projects that come along. We cannot afford everybody coming in here thinking all they have to do is put up cash and they're going to get additional parking spaces. There's just so many spaces to be allocated, and they are for the general public to park in too. And the mobility plan will help address some of these, because you can't force people that work there to park in the garages. They will use the public streets, but if they decide to live on Broadway, they won't use cars at all. They'll be walking. And that is my hope, that they will decide to. They'll have all the necessary items for living associated with the area. So live there, dine there, post office across the street, city council here where they can walk to with their complaints. Everything works
So
to their
is this
advantage.
leading to a motion, Mr. Weaver?
Well, those are my comments, yeah, and I'll move. If others don't have motions, I'll move it as soon as you're ready to.
Mr. Quintero, then.
Okay, I'll go on.
6-2, yeah, I'll move it.
Take my comments. I've been for readapting this building for many, many years. I've spent time in it. I've been with Mr. Hamilton in and out with different people, and I'm very happy that it seems like we're going to allow the Amity Group to do it. And in terms of that building that the speaker referred to in Salt Lake City, also built by Sarmiento, this blurb here talks about, with the help of National Register listing, federal tax credit, advice from preservationists, the newest technologies, and plenty of determination, the building was rehabbed with such finesse that its original architect, W.A. Sarmiento, says it looks as good today as the day it opened. The building's almost fully leased, anchoring and supporting the revitalization of downtown Salt Lake City. I think it's going to do the same to Broadway. That's why I asked a question of the other speaker, between the condos that are going to be built there, the mixed-use building, and I also think it's going to help the exchange immensely. You're going to have hundreds of people that are going to be there every day from Monday through Friday, and I'm sure from time to time they're going to be quite interested in walking out and going to the exchange and eating and possibly also doing some shopping. So I think it's going to make a big difference in this immediate neighborhood. And in terms of the finances, the city, in my opinion, is getting the deal of a lifetime. When we first started on this track, under no circumstances did I think we would be getting the kind of money that we're getting for this building, with tax increments and the purchase price and the money we're getting to fill what's essentially a garage that just, next empty. So, I mean, I'm just I'm just very happy. I think everyone's going to be happy. The lobby and the mezzanine that they're going to rehab is one of the nicest lobbies and mezzanines I've seen in these types of buildings. They're going to make it available to the public from time to time for different functions, and I think it's going to be very, very exciting, and I'm sure, just like in Salt Lake City, we'll wind up getting some real commendations for what they're about to embark on.
Mr. Manukian.
Yes, I'm glad we're off the $7 million figure we were considering in closed session last week, because that I probably wouldn't have voted for. But looking at at today's proposals and what we've seen today so far, financially going from approximately $8.5 million to $10 million, $8.5 by Kaiser Marston's estimates, to the owner of the building's proposal of approximately $10 million, excluding the residential portion of it, in both instances, is certainly value to the city. In terms of, I think the adaptive reuse of the building is certainly warranted. I'm glad that the building will be preserved, and I don't think that anyone else will come in at any point in time in the future and do anything, or will be able to do anything different. The Historical Society, as well as the LA Conservancy, will probably list the building sooner or later, and no one else will be able to come in and do anything different. I think from that perspective, it is certainly a value to the city. We also have to consider the value of the historical building to the cultural value of the city, and that's certainly preserving it is certainly warranted. So I will support the proposal. Also, a number of speakers mentioned in terms of setting a precedent. I think this is not setting a precedent. There aren't too many buildings like this in the vicinity. And if anyone else comes in with preservation of a historical building and they need help with parking, we will certainly entertain it. If that's what it means by precedent, that's fine, but I certainly don't think that this is setting a precedent. It's certainly setting a precedent in private public partnership in preserving a historical asset for the community. So I'm all for it.
Senator Najarian.
Okay, I have a couple questions. Our concern, I guess our resistance in the initial thought process of this building, of permitting the parking exception and the selling and the leasing of those parking spaces, is that we would somehow reach a level where the garages are full or the parking becomes inconvenient. So I have a question of John, if you could come up. Is there anything that the city can do were we to reach near or at near capacity of those parking garages to increase their capacity?
Yes, Member Najarian.
What could be done if we were to find ourselves in that situation?
Your name for the record, please.
John Obagdinian, Public Works Traffic Engineering. What we've done before we had the Marketplace Garage or the Exchange Garage, when we started to reach capacity, when we had major movies shown at the theater there, we would do valet parking at the lower level, or we would park some stack parking at the upper levels on the roof. The Marketplace, we've worked with the parking manager that should we get to a certain level where we each reach that 85% threshold, and parking becomes inconvenient as far as you have to drive up or down the levels to find a parking space, we can do valet parking at the lower level, and then to increase the capacity of the parking structure. That is one of the things that is very successful, and they do it in major parking facilities in Pasadena as well, where during the holidays, if you reach that capacity where there's more activity, that's a possibility. We can probably increase it by about 20%.
So we've got a safety net in case we do grow and we do utilize those parking garages more than...
And then in the Marketplace also, we have 47 parking spaces that are currently used by the police. Those spaces can also be made available. we will ask the police to remove those vehicles from the structure if we have visitor parking or monthly parking demand. So that's about 5% of the capacity.
Thank you, John. That was my question. Obviously, that makes me feel better because we didn't want to fill up those garages and blow them out and have no additional parking for any sort of increased downtown needs. My second question is, we're pegging these the value of these parking spaces, the monthly leasing between $45 to $55, and I think that reflects the current rates in the garages. And again, part of our mobility study is to make parking in the garages very convenient and inexpensive, so as to dissuade people from parking along Brand, taking up the more valuable street-side spots. What happens if at some point the council decides we want to lower the parking rates on those garages? I would say that if that were the case, we would set a minimum level for those parking spaces that Amity would be using at the current levels, and not have them dip below these current levels. One of the things Bonnie Nelson talked about is that they want parking to be very inexpensive in those garages, and I know that's something we're going to be looking at in the future when we set those parking rates. I don't want it to dip below. Let's say we have $20 a month parking for monthly. I don't want our lease prices on this project to go less than the 45 to 55.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Najarian, I think our assumption was in this structure, unlikely that you'd see monthly rates going down. We can certainly look at pegging this to some minimum. We anticipated these rates would likely go up in the future as parking becomes more dear. I think what Ms. Nelson was referencing is particularly in the downtown area, like with the Orange Street Garage, where you've got a myriad of parking. You've got surface parking in the rear that are public lots. You've got parking on the street that's public parking, and you've got structures. And right now, our rate structure is the inverse of what it should be. It's cheapest on the street, next in the surface lots, next in the structure. Her recommendation was it should be the other way around. It should be less expensive in the structure, more expensive on the most convenient the street. You don't really have that situation with the Marketplace Garage, but we can certainly look at setting a floor of the rate. Their agreement had been, and this hasn't been factored into the numbers, so the net present value assumes the current monthly rate. In our discussions indicated that they're willing to pay whatever the prevailing monthly charge in those garages is. Again, we anticipated those rates would likely go up over time, not come down.
In addition, as we look at the, I guess they call it the in lieu fee or the premium of $13 something a space, has staff factored in CPI, and will that increase by CPI over time?
Yes.
Well, I think their proposal was that number would remain the same. So there could be an increase in the basic rate, but the in lieu would remain the same.
Okay, I'd like to see that CPI because 25 years from now, that money is certainly not going to have the same value it has today. And this is perhaps something for when we get down to the DDA, that we look at increasing that with the level of the CPI, just so it maintains the same value 20 years from now that it does today.
I'm sorry, increasing what? The
in lieu fee. They're paying the parking plus the premium.
I heard that. Was there something else you said to increase with CPI? No. Just the in lieu fee.
Right.
Okay.
And then as the parking, whatever the parking rates are, if it goes
prevailing
up,
parking rates.
Right, then that's where it would go.
Well, it would be useful to get other sentiment. I mean, we're going to need to go back and begin working on both the E&A, and we'll begin working as soon as we can on a DDA, because that will take even longer. Be good to get a sense of the council to that. I mean, if you're going to give us what to go negotiate, because that wasn't part of our original conversation about the in lieu. In fact, I think it was their proposal that the in lieu remain at $13.50 or 75 cents.
A month.
A month.
And the parking rates at 55, is that?
Well, the parking rate is at prevailing rates. We used a 45 to 55 rate. It would be whatever the prevailing rate is, which, again, we've anticipated that rate will go up. In fact, my example with them in an earlier conversation was if 15 years from now it costs you $200 a month to park in the garage, that's going to be what you're going to have to buy 178 spaces for.
Is that?
They're shaking their heads up and down.
Well, for myself, that's enough. I think that more than does it. I'm not sure that we need to tie that basic rate to a CPI.
You're saying the in lieu?
I mean, the in lieu, yeah.
Well, what does anyone else think about
Is
it?
it done? Are you done?
No. Well, that's an issue that...
Keep going.
Keep going.
What else?
Okay. At what point do the 178 spaces become leased? When does the leasing begin? At the time of the CO?
Yes, that's been the proposal. We felt that was fair. At the time they have a certificate of occupancy, which is when people would begin to inhabit the building, they'd be required to lease all of the spaces, recognizing that they're going to have some lease-up time, but they'd be hit with the full amount of the 178 spaces from the time the C of O is issued. So frankly, we're benefiting by whatever their lease-up absorption period is going to be. They won't have that building full on day one. They'll try, but they likely won't have that building full of people on day one.
Okay. And where does this money go? Assuming this goes through, this $8 million or whatever the final figures, does it go into redevelopment?
The redevelopment agency component would be the purchase of the land, and of course the tax increment off the land. The parking fund would be the beneficiary of the value assigned to the parking.
Okay. The last point is, we talked about a sign. They raised a sign. I hope that any...
To approve.
I make those to approve. Okay. And I would be in favor of maintaining the nature of the new sign in accordance with the type of sign that they had previously, perhaps on the fin or whatever. I wouldn't be excited about breaking up the facade with a Hollywood production sign. That's it.
Okay. As for myself, I'm glad that this is finally, hopefully, over as far as negotiations are concerned. We have been going back and forth in different offers, and so we have an offer in front of us, and I think it's clear and concise. And in the end of the day, I'm fine with the way the offer has been presented by staff. I'm not into having more CPI added to. I think what we are getting at this point is sufficient. I think we're going to cover ourselves as the property value go up. We will be also getting a better tax revenue on it too. So let's not forget that. The property value is not going to stay where it is today. 10 years from now, if Hamidi sold this property and Mr. X, Y, and Z bought this thing, the property value is going to be at a higher rate, so we will be collecting. And I think my understanding is that the tax assessor every year adds on something to it anyway. So we will be getting some of that stuff. So overall, I think it's a good deal for the city. Now, how the city spends the money, that's ultimately up to us, whether we want to keep the 6.5 in the redevelopment agency, whether we want the redevelopment agency to pay it back to the city as a part of their loan that they owe us, and we could use it for some other purposes that we need to deal with it. But ultimately, we will make that decision. I'm happy that this is done, and there's a motion, but I have not heard a second on the motion yet.
6B1 and 2 is it?
6B2.
No, just two.
I'll second.
Second, first,
I do
second, third.
Mr. Weaver.
Mr. Sturbert asked if what we thought on the Mr. Najarian's thing on the lieu fee. I'm trying to figure out, is it a deal breaker or something, because
$13 a month.
at 75 cents today,
It's not even worth talking about it.
30 years from now, it'll be worth zero. So it's a question of if that's acceptable to everybody, or if we did put the CPI on it, is it a deal breaker? I don't know. But there's the logic train there.
It's not for me. It's not for me.
The logic train is there. Well, I meant for the applicant, because $13.75 a month, I don't know if that's a deal breaker for them, but I've always tried to advocate on our fee structure, everything in this city, that we increase by CPI on an annual basis.
It's like
keep
40
with
cents a
inflation.
year. 40 cents a year per month.
Well, I don't know what inflation's going to be like over 30 years. So if it wasn't a deal breaker, I'd be for it, but as Najarian, I don't think there's three here that think that way, so, for what it's worth.
Before we vote,
Yes, Najarian.
we were talking tax increment, and doesn't the tax increment end when our redevelopment ends?
Well,
Yes.
if
Which
I
is how
can,
many
and
years?
Jillian can weigh in here if I miss something. But you'll have an established life to the project area, not the agency. You continue to collect tax increment past the life of the project in order to fund any outstanding debt bonded as well as debt back to the city. That could go on for a number of years beyond the life of the project area. While you're collecting tax increment, you must still continue to do your 20% set aside for housing. And we've treated tax increment, whether it's for housing or whether it's for redevelopment purposes, as being the same because it all comes to the control of the agency or the city or the housing authority. So our feeling was the 30 years is a good way to look at this, even though the life of the project area ends in 2015, because your repayment for either bonded debt or city debt will go beyond that at least another 15 years.
So you do what's called a death throes?
Well, if you do a bond issue, it'll take it out even farther. But even now, the city's outstanding debt from the agency will allow you to benefit by tax increment for probably well in excess of a decade past the life of the project area.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second.
I don't know if we still have the motion. Mr. Weaver, is the motion
I made the
stays as
motion, I
is?
just said that, you mentioned about the new, and I said consider, but I said, I don't think he has three people.
No, I didn't get the votes.
B2?
You guys are giving away the farm today.
Oh, come on.
So I guess we'll take a vote on this.
We call
We have B2. There's a motion by Mr. Weaver and a second by Mr. Quintero. Roll call, please.
Agency members Menuchyan?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Chairman Yusefian?
Aye. Congratulations. Go out there and,
Don't come back.
yeah.
We should
This is
note
our
you-
final offer. We're not renegotiating this
Mr. Chair,
again.
you will see this again. There is really quite a bit of process that it's going to take. I might also point out that the Amity Group has indicated that they would want to keep the residential component and the office component tied together. The residential component will take more time and more process due to the review of that before you can close escrow. Therefore, that will mean a longer process on closing on the office component. We're estimating that this is probably a 5-month to 6-month process. You've got what's called a 3343 report that will require noticing and public hearing. That's a review of the sale of the property by the redevelopment agency to assure that it's at reuse value. Then you'll also have the whole entitlement process as well as a public hearing process on a disposition and development agreement.
And I'm hoping that as the construction or remodel of this office starts, they would use the property in the north of them to basically stage their contractors' vehicles and so on and so forth, so they're not parking all over the street, since they're going to own the parking lot above. Is that correct? Yeah, I'm hearing that that's correct, because you're not going to build that structure now, yet. So park all your contractors on that site while you remodel this site, and when that is done, so the contractors are not parking all over the streets to do that.
If I can, one of the things we'll want to produce during this period is a schedule for performance and construction on both sites. Again, because we'll likely not, if indeed we close escrow on both properties together, that means they're going to have access to them at the same time. We'll want to have a schedule of performance and a schedule of construction to go along with the disposition.
But I wanted to make sure, because current location is leased out to a vendor, I wanted to make sure that they don't continue that and have the place leased out and collect the money while their contractors are parking all over the street. So I just wanted to make sure. Thank you. What's next, please?
Next is any new business?
Is there any agency comments?
Move to adjourn.
We're adjourned. Mr. Mayor, we have another meeting. Study session. Should we come back in about 5 minutes?
What study session is this?
It's on your study session is a joint meeting of the City Council Redevelopment Agency on the downtown specific plan discretionary approvals, whether you want to consolidate that with the agency and City Council.
I'll have to skip. I have a meeting tonight that I got to get ready for.
Can we take 5 minutes?
We'll take 5 minutes.